This is my first time submitting anything. I've been listening to these for a very long time now, and never did I think I would ever have something to submit myself. For some context, it's important to know that my parent is in the military. When this story takes place, we were living abroad in a North American country. I understand it's easy to find out which one, but I'd like to be safe. On the day that this takes place, I had long boarded to the public transit to catch the bus to school. The bus that I normally take doesn't take me all the way to the school, but drops me off on a busy street that's about a 15-minute walk or a 7-ish minute skate to the building. The path to school is also relatively complex, so it wouldn't be very easy to follow it. It crosses one major street and sub-street until it drops you off on a walking trail. Now I would typically put in my headphones and get to school quickly, given I had practice for my sports at 7 o'clock. Normal school doesn't start until 8:20. I know that might not seem important, but it comes into play later. Because practice was in the morning, this meant that we wouldn't be able to get into the school and would go straight to the boathouse. I'm a rower, by the way. I go to a private school that's located inside another larger building with a ton of smaller business offices, so we would go into the larger building but not into the school area or locker room. Fast forward just a little bit. I was skating onto the walking path when out of my eye I noticed a white van. Cliche, I know. I didn't think anything of it at first until a man stepped out of it. It was quite cold, so his face was covered up with a balaclava. He was wearing bright orange and yellow reflective clothing, which I guess makes sense given that he was in a work van. I brushed it off, and it sat in the back of my mind until the end of practice, when I was immediately reminded as I was walking from the boathouse to the main building. I could see the same fucking white van. Still, though, I decided to just go inside and continue on with my day as normal. As the end of the day rolls around, I pack up all my things and get ready to go. I had planned to help one of my friends with their first date. She was very nervous, and given that I was close with both of them, I had no problem with this. They had planned to go to a local ice cream shop right in the middle of our downtown. We have a very large and active downtown area with a lot of people, given that this is a college town. We stuck out like a sore thumb, given we were wearing our school uniforms, which consisted of medium-length kilts, knee-high socks, and polos with the school logo. At some point, my friend gave me the cue to bug off, so I said my goodbyes to the two of them and wished them luck, and went off to my bus stop to catch the bus home. As I walked through the main street filled with tons of people and stores, as I was crossing the street, out of the corner of my eye, I saw that same damn van. It was the first time that red flags started to go off. I began to quicken my pace, just as I heard the large door slamming shut. After around 30 seconds, I approached the corner that would take me closer to the bus stop. It was a bank, and it had large glass windows that were reflective, so I took a glance at one window in the back, and I could see the same man wearing orange and yellow reflective clothing. At this point, I know I've seen this man one too many times, and start booking it down the sidewalk. It was no longer a very well-traveled street, so I was completely alone with this man on my heels. At this point, I feel that I should let you know that 1, I'm young, but I look much older, and my figure was encapsulated by my uniform. I am very tall as well, so my kilt was a bit shorter than it should have been. And 2, earlier I had noted that my parent is military. Well, my school backpack was a tactical bag with a giant American flag and another patch from an old brigade they were in. This gets a lot of attention, good and bad, so I had switched bags, and I was concealing a knife inside. I know this makes me fit the typical American stereotype, but I've lived in a lot of shady places before, and I'm very paranoid because of it. Now that you know these things, I can continue. As I was approaching the crossing that would put me on the correct street, the man started to run after me. I knew this because of the sound of his heavy work boots slamming against the ground got so much louder. At this time, I whipped out my phone. I tried to call my mother, but she didn't pick up. I tried to call my brother after, but there was still no answer. I quickly texted my brother a few short sentences about the situation before making my final decision to bolt. I looked down the street, and I could see I had about 10 seconds to make it before the cars coming from either way would turn me into roadkill. I decided to take my chance at the same time as I heard that same heavy work boot slam into the ground only 2 feet behind me. The man screamed in anger as I bolted across the street in between the cars. I continued running across the small lot and caught my bus after 2 full minutes of jogging. I've since stopped skating to school because my school moved online due to COVID, but I start back next week in person, and I dread taking that bus. My parents and I have had long conversations about this, but unfortunately, the only way for me to get to school is through public transit. So to the man who followed me around the whole day, I don't care if I get charged. If I ever see you following me again, I'll fucking stab you. So for your sake, let's not meet. Below is a story from when I was in college. It happened when I was on one of my camping trips on some land owned by the college and nearly made me stop camping for good. So I hope you all enjoy. During the fall and winter of 2016, I spent most of my time camping. I camp a lot, but that winter, I basically decided to live outside. I was in college, and our campus sat on top of forested bluffs that went right down to the riverbank. I would hike out with my pack on Friday afternoons, and I wouldn't return until Monday morning. Most of the time I camped alone, just because I would be out there so often and so frequently for several consecutive nights, so my buddies could only come with me every so often. I moved camp very frequently, but I tended to favor a couple of really nice spots. Some people have told me that it's odd that I camped by myself so often, but I really enjoyed the peacefulness of just getting away from it all. Anyway, starting around mid-November, I began noticing strange things about my campsite in the morning. When I'd wake up, I'd get out of my tent and notice that pans wouldn't be where I left them the night before, or my pack would no longer be hanging on the tree. You know, little things like that. A couple of times as well, my food bag looked like it was missing some of the food I had packed in it, even though I had hung it in the trees the night before. At the time, though, I didn't pay much attention to it, because like I said, they were little things that I fairly easily talked myself out of caring about. This continued on for weeks, and one night in late December, I finally started to take notice of all these strange incidents. It was a very dark night, with just a sliver of a moon out, so there was barely any natural light. I had just gotten into my tent after cleaning up and reading by the fire for a while. It was completely dark at this point, so I decided to turn in early so that I could get up and hike some new trails in the morning. I couldn't have been asleep for very long when I woke up to the sound of something at my feet near the door of the tent. I could hear something brushing against the synthetic tent fabric, very quietly and deliberately. Thinking it was a raccoon or a coyote exploring the outside of my tent, I leaned up my head quietly to see if I could get a glimpse of it. However, the moment I raised my head up, something took off into the trees, crashing through the dead leaves. The loud crashing stunned me, and I immediately got up to investigate. The first thing I noticed was that the bottom flap of my tent was open, and I never leave my tent open. After I turned on my flashlight, I noticed that my wool blanket was gone as well. I always kept an extra wool blanket for nights that got particularly cold, and that winter had been a very cold one. That night definitely freaked me out, but so many strange things like this happen when you go camping that it just isn't something that sticks with you forever. I either thought I wouldn't have to deal with whatever it was again, or I would just forget about what happened. but I went on camping for another couple of weeks. Then, in mid-January, I woke up one morning and decided to check out the sunrise from the riverbank because there are some really amazing sunrises at this time of year. I walked down my trail towards the river and began to make my way through the tall switchgrass that lined the river. I crossed through a grove of trees to get to a clear spot with some shorter grass to sit down. However, when I stepped out of the grove of trees into the open, I froze dead in my tracks. Maybe 20 yards from me was a dirty, gaunt, middle-aged man crouched over by a small fire. Judging by the shape of his clothing, he was either homeless or had been outside in the same pair of clothes for quite some time. He spun around the second I came out into the open and just sat there staring at me. He had no expression and made no movements, just stared directly at me, with his eyes more wide open than I thought possible. We sat there frozen for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a minute or two. Then I broke myself free of this staring contest and began to back away. As I did this, though, I noticed the sleeping bag, pots, and blanket piled around his fire. They were my blankets, my pots. I knew this because I had painted the handles of my pots blaze orange so they would never get confused with gear of any of my buddies that they brought on our camping trips. This man had been sneaking around my campsite at night for weeks, stealing my stuff, and going as far as to steal my own blanket out of my tent. I turned and sprinted to my campsite to grab up my rifle, and immediately returned, completing the whole trip in only about 2 minutes. But when I finally arrived back to the clearing, the man had completely disappeared, and none of my stuff was there anymore. Even the fire had been completely snuffed out. I couldn't believe it. I slowly made my way over to where his campsite had been, scanning my surroundings the entire time. There was no trace of him ever being there, and there was no sign of the huge pile of cookware and blankets. Honestly, I started to think that I had been hallucinating or something, until I stuck my hand over the black pile of coals and felt that they were still warm. I never reported the incident to the police, and I didn't tell my friends until months later. Obviously, I ended my winter camping outings that same day and stuck to the safety of town from now on. I tried to figure out just what he was doing on that bluff, because the land belonged to the monastery, and I was the only one who had permission to be out there. However, the more I thought about it, the more I freaked myself out. There was a federal penitentiary 30 minutes away, and a state prison even closer. I'd never heard any news about escaped convicts, but the possibility certainly didn't help. I started to think about how quickly he had just disappeared, how I couldn't believe it was possible. The town where my college was kind of had a long history of being haunted as well, with plenty of stories associated with the college. Whoever he was, though, he must have been following me around for weeks. Like I said, I moved camp a lot, and for him to steal all of those things, he would have somehow had to know where my camp was every single weekend. I never saw the man again after that, and it took me quite a long time to work up the nerve to ever go back into those woods. When I was a young girl, from about age 5 to age 7, my family lived in a shack near Topley, British Columbia, right smack dab in the middle of the Highway of Tears. Topley isn't even a village, it's an incorporated community. It had a school, gas station, restaurant, a tire shop, a motel, a church, and a small community hall. My father's family had been there since early 1900s. My mother's family are indigenous, so thousands of years for them. My siblings, cousins, and I ran wild when my dad brought us in. And Dad drank very heavily back then. His childhood was extremely rough, and so he self-medicated with alcohol. He was a well-liked logger, though. He was good at his job and worked camp jobs where he wasn't able to drink on work days. And camp jobs are jobs so remote that the employer provides temporary housing. Cabins, echo trailers, whatever they can manage, really. They generally have cooks and cleaners as well to take care of the workers. When Dad came home from camp, we would go visit. Often this meant we would band together or split off into groups for our chosen activities. This was a lot of fun, and most times we had to leave school and catch a bus home, or during the summer just play in the yard that sat right next to Highway 16. We'd also play in the woods or creek that bordered our rented property. In summer days, when Dad was at work, we would be sent outside early in the morning, and our stepmother would lock the door to prevent us from entering. There was a pump outside for water if we needed it, so picture 3 girls of mixed ethnicity and 2 somewhat smaller, very pale brothers, playing on a gravel driveway or the unmowed, uneven ground we treated as our lawn. We would often be completely unsupervised, with few, if any, toys to play with. We did have bicycles, so we would often improvise jumps, trying to get the best height from our bikes. With that image spelled out for you, I have to take you back a couple of days to when my father first returned from camp. It was the 1970s, so the kids climbed into the back of the truck, while my dad and his best friend Al went into the cab. We went out of our home for a bit and onto a property south of the highway. We spent a good few hours checking the road and to see if it was nice enough to go out and go camping. Dad and Al were building a cabin right next to a good fishing lake. They had established that they could get out there, but it would be a good idea to wait about a week before bringing the whole family along. As we were about to pull back onto the highway to travel east, my dad sees some police tape. So he pulls across the highway and onto what was either an old logging road or a farmer's access to his fields. Dad discusses it with Al for a bit. Al didn't have the best relationship with the police, so I was a bit surprised when Al said he never wanted to go see. On that part of the highway, there were quite a lot of cars that end up going off the road. It was an extremely long, steep hill, and they've since made the road a bit lower grade of steepness. The brakes would just heat up and fail. Most car wrecks didn't have police tape, so Dad just had to check. He sauntered on over behind some willows, and we could all see his head and shoulders still. He suddenly turned around and began running, the kind of hopping style running that you have to do on uneven ground, back to the truck and hopped in. He took us immediately home, and whenever we asked what he saw, he would say, "Never mind, it was nothing." After my dad passed out, though, I heard him whisper that he had seen a dead body. Here we are, a bunch of kids playing next to a shack. Dirty, unsupervised. I was sitting there making mud balls. I was about 6 or 7 years old, I guess, and I see that someone pulls into the driveway next door. Our shack was within walking distance of 3 other neighbors. I took care of the rabbits for the people next door, so I felt protective of their home. I stood up and watched a tall and slender man and a short, stocky guy get out of a dark-colored sedan. They were wearing suits. I went to get my older sisters. Dad had gone to visit without us and was due back in a couple of hours for supper. My stepmother was mostly sleeping at that time of day and would not be aware of these strangers. The 2 men in suits walked up that makeshift bridge. I guess they knocked on the door, but no one was home. No car in the driveway would have told them that, though. They walked over, and because I was defending my mud balls and my older sisters, we weren't the most responsible. They had to come stand right next to me. These 2 walked up, and the shorter man spoke. The shorter guy scared the daylights out of all of us. He had extremely pronounced canine teeth, and I was almost certain he was a vampire. I mean, he had a suit, the teeth, even a widow's peak. He was Dracula. He asked where our neighbor was, though, and because I took care of their rabbits, I spoke to them more often, so I managed to answer his questions about where my neighbor lived, and where he was, when he would be back as well. As they hopped into the car, my sister and I were almost peeing ourselves with excitement and fear. A real-life vampire! We told Dad all about it when he got back, and when the neighbor came home, I was sent to tell him about the 2 men. They came back 2 other times as well. Almost the same scenario. We were all outside playing, they'd just walk over, ask some questions, and leave. The final time, though, my dad was home. He hopped in his truck, and went and got the neighbor after talking to the two men himself. As kids, there was no way we could know about the dead body. I had never learned until a few years ago, shortly before Al passed away, as he told me about it. For us, it was the vampire and his tall, quiet friend in suits that scared us. We watched out for each other all that summer, worried that the vampire would come get us. The imaginations of small children, terrified of people who looked different. The real horror was what my father had seen. He started to drink a lot more after that, and he would often give us lectures about never hitchhiking from a very young age. And that's the story of how the investigators of a murdered hitchhiker by the roadside unknowingly terrorized the kids of a small community for an entire summer. Sorry this is really long. I don't want to give my school's name out, but I'm pretty sure if you do some really hard digging, you can probably find it. It'll be about 3.5 months to the day 5 years ago when this all happened. I live in Southern California, San Bernardino to be more exact. It's a very large county, spanning 24 cities, but San Bernardino itself has over 250,000 people in it. A very high crime rate, a large homeless population, large drug presence, worthless cops, and a lot of poverty. You get the gist. But here in San Bernardino, we're all very close. Minorities stick together and try not to rob each other. Gangs stake their claims, but for the most part they leave the innocent alone. Kids can actually play outside because their people protect them. Everyone knows the street rules. No snitching. Don't stay out after dark. If you see a crime happen, you didn't see anything. So, an extremely unusual setting for a dangerous city like mine, but nothing to the extent of December 2nd. I was a freshman in high school. It was December 2nd, 2015, and there I was, sat in my 5th period art class. I was hearing the teacher and a couple of other students gathering around the teacher's computer, babbling on something which didn't interest me. But I was curious. I looked up and saw them pull down the screen showing a car chase. I thought to myself, oh, that's cool, and went back to doing my work. It wasn't until 6th period that things started to get a bit scary. Suddenly, we heard on the school-wide speaker, "Lockdown." Fuck, I thought, worrying more about why the hell I'm locked down in my worst class, rather than what the fuck was actually going on. Due to the lockdown, we had to stay in our 6th period until school ended. Then we were let out, but only one school building at a time to our waiting loved ones. I get home and my dad is sitting there watching TV. What I saw was a heavily damaged SUV with bullet holes all over it. I told my dad, "Hey, that's the car chase that people were watching in my art class." He looked at me pale-faced and said in Spanish, "I'm guessing you didn't watch much of it." Later that day, I was on the internet, wondering just what the hell was going on. Turns out, it wasn't just a car chase. It was a terrorist attack, done by a man and a woman who had pledged their allegiance to ISIS. And correct me if I'm wrong, they started shooting from Loma Linda all the way down to the mall and started a car chase all over the city. The reason my school had to go on lockdown was because the terrorist couple had driven right past our school, and we didn't know if we would be next. They were shot dead, and all who were involved were arrested. But this is where I come in. It was well known by the next day who these people were, what they did, and many conspiracies on why they'd done it. When I got to school the next morning, I heard rumors going around that bomb-sniffing dogs had been to our school. I thought to myself, is that really necessary? They didn't even enter the school premises. Wrong. I had their names in the back of my mind after reading so many news articles, and the next day at school, I was walking into the cafeteria for breakfast when a paper taped to the wall and a folder sheet protector caught my attention. I can't remember what it said exactly, but I have a photographic memory, and I remember what the paper said about 1 to 2 years later. What I do remember, though, is that I nearly soiled myself reading it. It read, San Bernardino County Health Department, signed by the male terrorist. This fucker had actually been to and inspected our school God knows how many times. For his name to be on that paper, he had to be our school's main inspector. To get even scarier, it was reported that this man and his neighbor planned to do a school shooting in 2011, but the plan was abandoned. They could have shot up anywhere while he was still employed. Knowing that this dude had access and could possibly know the layouts of many schools, restaurants, and buildings gave me anxiety to the max. By lunchtime, I noticed that the paper had been taken down in the school's attempt to hide the fact that a fucking terrorist had been there. I thought everyone had seen it, or would have at least been told about it. Still to this day, I asked friends and former classmates if they knew that a terrorist had been inspecting our school, and literally throughout the years I have asked, they didn't know that this fucker was the main guy who was watching over it. I don't ever remember seeing him, but I do remember even as a freshman, and not being in high school for very long, there were always these groups of people who would walk in class and just watch and mark things on their clipboards. Most likely they were health inspectors, but I can't remember if this guy was part of the group. So, to the terrorists, Saeed Rizwan Farouk and Tashfeen Malik, burn in fucking hell. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. And if you have any comments about the way I narrate, the way I do my videos, or anything, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I could always use feedback on how to make my channel just that little bit better. For those of you who are at all interested about my life at all, the next school semester begins on August the 22nd, so that means it's going to be starting pretty soon, so I'll be going to school. I don't think that's going to affect the schedule at all. I'll still be making videos once every 2 days or so, since I really feel like that schedule is the most comfortable for me, and I really enjoy making videos, and it helps me relax during all this craziness going on. Anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that in case something does affect the schedule, I will let you guys know right away. As always, if you guys want to contact me at all, then please be sure to take a look in the description below. It contains links to all of my social media, including my Gmail, Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch accounts. If you guys would like to get a fast response, be sure to message me on either Twitter or Gmail, because those are the ones I check most often. I don't check Facebook quite as much, so it might take me a little bit longer to reply to you on there. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include the name of the story if it has one, what type of story it is in the tagline if it applies, and also be sure to include how you would like to be credited in the description of the story the video appears in. Please, if you guys send in stories, make sure it's at least a couple of paragraphs long with as much detail as you are comfortable describing, and please make sure it follows basic grammatical etiquette, because sometimes I get stories that are just a little bit too short. They're only about a paragraph or so long, and those take me about 30 seconds to read, so they're just a little bit too short to be put into the videos, unfortunately. As well, I must shout out my friend Alan, who does horror art, and he also does commissions as well, and sells his own merchandise and stuff, and has his art in galleries and everything. Links to all of his social media will be in the description below as well. Be sure to check him out and give him some love, because he is a very good personal friend of mine, and he also does some excellent art. If you're curious about the music used in this video, it can always be found in the description below the video in the order which it appears in. I have links to the artists as well. As for the new channel, I'm still not sure what I'm going to do with that. I will try to give it a shot this weekend. I was a little bit busy getting ready for school and stuff this semester, so we'll see how that turns out. I still got to decide on mascot and everything for it too. Anyways, I think that's pretty much it, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.